Next section we're covering in the geometry unit is titled Perimeter and Circumference. So by the end of this lesson, you need to be able to find the perimeter of a polygon and the circumference of a circle. Perimeter is the distance around a geometric figure, and it's found by adding the lengths of the sides. So when we discuss perimeter, you imagine yourself walking around the outside of the object, and you are determining basically how far did you walk. So we want to find the perimeter of each polygon. In the first example, we have a quadrilateral, and we have 4 side lengths, 8 inches, 12 inches, 9 inches, and 16 inches. So simply to find the perimeter, we are going to add all 4 sides, 8 plus 12 plus 9 plus 16. And then we always want to make sure that we have our units. So 8 plus 12 plus 9 plus 16 is 45, and perimeter is just in the units, so 45 inches. We don't square them or anything like that, like we do with area. Here we have a triangle, so 3 side lengths here. So if you were to start on one side of the triangle and walk around it, how far do you walk? So we have 9 plus 11 plus 12, and that's 32 centimeters. So if you were to walk around that triangle, you would walk 32 centimeters. Here we have a rectangle. We're specifically told it's a rectangle, but they only label 2 of the sides. So we have to understand what that means in a rectangle. And the definition of a rectangle is opposite sides are parallel and opposite sides are congruent, which means that the opposite sides are the same length. So this is also 32 meters, and this side is 15 meters. So you solve this problem again by adding up all 4 sides. So 15 plus 32 plus 15 plus 32. And that's 30, 60, 94. Should be 94 meters. Another way to add up the sides of a rectangle and find the perimeter is you could multiply each side by 2. So you could do 15 times 2, since there are 2 side lengths of 15, plus 32 times 2. That would give you 30 plus 64, which is also 94 meters. So 2 different ways really with a rectangle that you could find the perimeter. Finally, we need to discuss circumference, and circumference is the distance around a circle. So essentially, it is the perimeter of a circle, and it's found by using 2 different formulas. One formula includes the radius, and the other formula includes the diameter. And what I want to make sure here that we understand is that we are not going to be using 3.14 anymore for pi, so I need to scribble that out. You are going to be using pi. The pi button on your calculator, which means it won't really round it out to any decimal place like 3.14 does. So the first formula to find the circumference of a circle is 2 pi r. 2 times pi times the radius. Remember, the radius is the distance from the center of the circle to the outside edge. It's half of the diameter. Then the other formula is if you have diameter, it's pi times d. And remember that the diameter is the distance from one outside edge of the circle to another that passes through the center of the circle. And so if you compare the 2 formulas, what you notice in the first formula, the circumference equals 2 pi r, remember that 2 times r, or the radius times itself, the radius times 2 is the diameter. So that's the difference in the formula. Pi times r is d. Those 2 things are equal. So the formulas essentially then are equal. So we want to find the circumference of the circle to the nearest tenth, and we don't want to use 3.14 for pi. So we need to make sure that we understand we're using the pi button on the calculator because that's going to be important as we head into I-STEP. So the circumference of the circle is, if we have the radius, 2 pi r. So we just fill in 2 times pi times 10, and we use our calculator. 2 times pi times 10, and that gives us 62.83, 185, 307. You don't really have to go out that far because you may have recognized in the directions I asked to round to the nearest tenth. So that would be 62.8 centimeters. We do need to make sure we have units. Now I have you finding the circumference of the circle, but this time I'm giving you the diameter. So we're going to use the formula for circumference that has diameter. C equals ID. So we plug in the diameter, 8. And so in our calculator, we type in pi times 8, and we get 25.13274123. And if we round that to the nearest tenth, it's 25.1 inches. So now let's look at an example where we actually know the perimeter, but we need to find the length of one of the sides. So if we know the total perimeter of this shape is 25 feet, and we know 4 of the side lengths, we are missing the 5th side length, we can set ourselves up with an equation. So if perimeter equals all the sides added up together, that would be 25 equals 7 plus 4 plus 3 plus 6 plus x. And essentially this is just an equation that you could solve for x. So if we simplify, we get 25 equals 11 plus 9 is 20 plus x. Subtract 20 from both sides. Then we get that x equals 5. And remember, we do need units, so 5 feet. So the missing side length is 5 feet. If you wanted to check your answer, you could take 5, 7, 4, 3, 6, add them all back up, make sure you get 25. Now, how do we find basically the diameter or the radius if we know the circumference? And there's a way to do that. So if we know the circumference, we can find the diameter and the radius. The question is, how do we do that? So we want to use our formula. We're going to find them both. I'm going to find the diameter first. So that means I'm going to use pi times d. And you're simply plugging in the pieces you know. The circumference is 37.7. I know that pi is pi, and I don't know the diameter. So in order to find the diameter, I need to divide both sides by pi. Remember, pi is just a number, and that will give us the diameter. So if we take 37.7 divided by pi, your calculator says 12.000282271, and it goes on, and that's because we didn't round pi. And here I would probably have you, again, round it to the nearest tenth or even the nearest whole number. So we'll do the whole number here, and that's 12. And remember, it's in inches. So the diameter is 12 inches. And we need to find the radius. Remember, the radius is just half of the diameter, so we would say 6 inches. And you could have found that using the other formula. You could have used 2 pi r and solved for r. You would have gotten 6, and then you would double it to get 12. So can you find the perimeter of a polygon? We simply add up the side lengths. And can you find the circumference of a circle? Remember that we learned 2 important formulas there, so make sure you have both of those in your notes. We will work on the perimeter and circumference worksheet in class.